I feel stuck in a relationship where my boyfriend is trying to get me pregnant without my consent, struggling to balance school, work, and his pressures, and when I try to speak up I'm 24 now, and I've been with my boyfriend, also 24, for 4 years. I'm studying at university and working part-time, with a little over a year left before I finally finish my degree. For a long time, everything between us felt effortless and good. We talked the way best friends talk, easily, constantly, and with so much laughter that I often caught myself wondering how I got so lucky. I honestly didn't think I'd ever find that kind of bond with someone. Before him, I'd only had one other boyfriend, and back then, I thought maybe relationships just weren't for me, that maybe I wasn't cut out for that closeness or that commitment. Then I met him, and everything shifted. I thought I had found the person I'd marry someday. We fit into each other's lives so seamlessly. His family welcomed me in a way that made me feel like I belonged there. They were warm, kind, and genuinely happy to get to know me. Over time, I built a relationship with them that felt like it had always existed. We all shared meals together, inside jokes, stories. It made me hopeful that one day I could officially be a part of their family, too. About halfway through our relationship, though, something changed. He started asking me about children. At first, it was casual, an innocent curiosity about the future. But as time passed, it became more frequent, more pointed, and more persistent. He'd bring it up when we were out on walks, or lying in bed, or even over breakfast, painting these vivid pictures of our life together with kids in the near future. He talked about wanting to have them before he got too old. I always brushed it off gently. I told him we were still young, and that, if we took good care of ourselves, we'd still have the energy to raise and play with our kids later. I thought that reassurance would be enough. But it wasn't. He grew pushier. He started creating these hypothetical situations. Me getting pregnant during my final year of university, taking a term off for maternity leave, and then coming back to finish my degree. He made it sound so manageable, so simple. He said other women had done it and turned out just fine, that they'd had kids back to back and still thrived. So why couldn't I? But that was never what I wanted. I'd been crystal clear from the very start of our relationship. Marriage first. Degree complete. Then children. That wasn't just a timeline, it was a boundary for me, something I had thought we were both on the same page about. The idea of juggling a newborn while trying to finish my degree didn't just sound hard. It sounded like a recipe for me not finishing at all. It felt like a slippery slope, and I knew myself well enough to know I might never climb back out if I slipped. Still, every time I told him no, the conversation circled back sooner or later. His reasoning always hinged on the fact that other women had done it. They managed, he'd say. They were perfectly fine. But that didn't matter to me. I'm not those women. My life is not theirs. And my dreams, my plans, are valid even if they don't look like someone else's success story. I stood firm, but his persistence made it harder every time. Around this time, things at home took a dark turn. My father, who had always struggled with his temper, became more aggressive after my mother and sister left. They didn't just leave, they vanished in the night, quietly moving out without telling me beforehand. They went into a shelter, and because of the protocols at those places, I couldn't even visit them directly. The best I could do was meet them on neutral ground, at my university campus, just to see their faces and hear their voices. Back home, things spiraled fast. My father's anger was sharp and constant, and I no longer felt safe under that roof. So I left. I moved in with my boyfriend. It wasn't a decision made lightly, or even under ideal circumstances, but at the time, it felt like survival. His home became my refuge, and with everything crumbling around me, he felt like the one steady thing I could count on. I'll be honest, a part of me hoped that once we lived together, some of the pressure about children might ease. Maybe we'd get into a rhythm and let the future unfold at its own pace. Maybe he'd see how much we had on our plates already and understand why I wasn't ready to add even more. The relationship was definitely going through a rough patch around this time. I was at a point in my life where everything seemed to require my attention: school, work, volunteer commitments, and I felt stretched so thin that it was hard to give him the time and attention he wanted. I remember feeling so burnt out. My schedule was relentless. I'd wake up early, sometimes around 6 or 7 a.m., to head to campus for work. I'd be on my feet for hours before heading to class, attending lectures, and then working again. My weekends weren't any better. I spent them holed up in the library or at home, buried in assignments, reading textbooks, and studying for upcoming exams. There were days when I'd pull all-nighters, trying to get everything done. Even when I was asleep, My mind was racing with deadlines, grades, and the pressure to keep up. It wasn't that I didn't care about the relationship. I wanted to, but I was running on fumes. Sometimes, I'd fall asleep studying on the couch or at my desk, exhausted, and he'd carry me to bed. I appreciated it, but in some ways it felt like a routine. He was always there, but we weren't really connecting the way we used to. He tried to be understanding, saying that he knew school and work kept me busy, but he still needed me. And in a way, I understood that. But when he started saying things like, "You can still do the household chores," it felt like the weight of everything was being dumped on me. I didn't disagree entirely with him. It's true that maintaining a clean living space is important, but the way things were piling up around me didn't make sense. The house was constantly messy, not from me, but from him. I would clean the house on Sundays, but by Tuesday, it was already looking like a disaster again. He'd eat snacks all the time, leaving wrappers and crumbs everywhere, and when I'd ask him to throw things away or clean up, he'd just leave everything lying around. The dishes were always piled up in the sink. Even when we had no clean dishes left, he'd leave his used ones for me to clean. He didn't seem to care, or maybe he thought I would just pick up the slack like I always did. It was frustrating because I was barely home. I left before him, worked all day, and came home late. My schedule was so packed that I barely had time for anything, let alone cleaning up after him. I had to balance my classes, my job, my volunteer work, and trying to maintain some kind of normal life. I couldn't see how I could give any more without sacrificing my sleep, my grades, or the money I needed to survive. But despite all of that, there he was, pushing me to do more. And then there was the issue with kids. I never thought it would get to this point. He kept bringing up the idea of having children, and his desire to have them, young, started becoming more intense, more desperate. One night, it crossed a line. He tried to get me pregnant without my consent. I don't know how to explain how that felt. It wasn't just about the action. It was the breach of trust, the disregard for my wishes and boundaries. It hurt in a way that words can't fully capture. I knew I should have left right then, but I didn't. I couldn't. I didn't want to go back to my dad's house, not after everything that had happened there. And at the time, I couldn't move in with my mom either. Things weren't stable enough for that. I didn't have anywhere to go. He apologized afterward, of course. He said it was his fear of not being able to have kids while he was still young. He spoke about how he feared he would die without having a child, and how he couldn't imagine his life without that. I could see his pain, his regret, and maybe that's why I stayed. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been violated. It didn't matter how sorry he was. That moment felt like something that couldn't be taken back. But I didn't tell my parents. Instead, I decided I would start to gradually move out. I still have mixed feelings about it, though. Sometimes, after a huge argument, we'd go back to having good times, and it would almost feel like everything was okay again. And then I'd start doubting myself. Maybe it was a mistake to consider leaving? Maybe things would get better if I just kept trying? But I couldn't shake the reality of what had happened. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't the kind of relationship I wanted to be in. But leaving him felt complicated. There were the good times, the moments that made me feel loved and cherished. And then there was the guilt of potentially breaking up with him and becoming the villain in the eyes of his family. They always told me how much he loved me, how we had something special. They'd offer advice on how I could make things work, how I could compromise. I could already hear their voices in my head, and it made everything feel harder. At times, I found myself torn between staying and going. I loved him, but I didn't feel loved in return, at least not in a healthy way. There were moments when I thought maybe I was being selfish, maybe I wasn't doing enough for him. But then I'd remember everything that had happened, the pressure, the lack of support, and that horrifying moment when he crossed a boundary I thought was unbreakable. I knew deep down that I needed to leave. But leaving meant facing everything I'd been avoiding. It meant letting go of the life I had built with him and facing the unknown. And even though I knew it was the right thing to do, it didn't make it any easier. It didn't make it any less painful. So, I stayed a little longer, pretending everything was fine, hoping the good times would outweigh the bad. But in my heart, I knew the truth. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for a relationship that wasn't healthy for me. After I moved in with my mom, things started to settle a little bit. My mom had found a place to stay that was closer to my university, so it made getting to school and work much easier. I've always been more of a night owl, so this setup was better for me. No more early mornings, and I could get some peace and quiet before heading out. But the whole situation wasn't ideal, especially with my mom and sister both not working and me being the only one earning enough to support my school expenses. My mom had explained that she wasn't going to be staying in this place long, that it was just temporary while they figured things out. That meant I couldn't move all my things over, which was frustrating, but I had no choice. I still had some of my things at his place, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't keep dividing myself like that. He had been upset when I left, and I totally understood why. It probably felt like I was abandoning him, but I had to put myself first. I explained why I had to leave. I just couldn't handle everything. Trying to focus on my studies, work, and keeping the house in order just wasn't working. I had to make a choice between my mental health and the relationship, and I chose myself. It was hard, and I could feel the tension at first, but I think it smoothed over after a while. We're still together, and I visit him on weekends. But every time I go, there's a little part of me that wonders if it's a mistake. It's like I'm constantly battling with myself. On the one hand, I want to make it work. I care about him. But on the other hand, the things that have happened still weigh on me, and I feel like I'm walking on eggshells around him. I've got exams coming up soon, and the last thing I need is more drama. Then, about a month ago, things took a turn again. It was a Saturday, and I had come over to visit. I had spent most of the day studying, trying to prepare for the exams that were quickly creeping up on me. I didn't get to bed until around 2 a.m. after a long study session, and I was absolutely drained. My head was spinning from the workload, and I just wanted to sleep for a few hours before I had to get up again and deal with everything. But when I woke up the next morning, I was in the middle of an uncomfortable situation. He was trying to initiate sex, and I was so tired that I could barely keep my eyes open. It was such an odd feeling being in that state, where I just wanted to get some rest, but he was still trying to get physical. After a few times of me moving my body back, signaling that I wasn't interested, he stopped. But the whole thing left me feeling weird and unsettled. It wasn't just the fact that he tried, it was the fact that I had to physically push him away multiple times before he got the message. Later that day, I confronted him about it. I asked him why he kept doing that, especially when I was so obviously drained. He just gave me the same old response, saying that he wouldn't do it again, that he understood, and it wouldn't happen in the future. But it didn't feel like a genuine apology, and it didn't feel like he was really listening to me. It was like he thought it was just another one of those things we could brush under the rug and move on from. But it wasn't. I needed more from him than that, and I didn't know how to get him to see it. The next night, I stayed over again, but I ended up sleeping on the couch. It just felt so awkward, and I needed my sleep before I had to head back to my mom's place and get to work the next morning. I didn't want to keep letting this kind of behavior slide, but at the same time, I felt like I was losing the ability to communicate what I needed. I didn't want to feel like I was constantly walking on eggshells, or that I was the one who had to adjust every time something was off. I've gone back a couple more times since then, and the same issues keep happening. I feel like I'm stuck in this cycle. He's apologized, but it's the same kind of apology, and I don't know if it's enough anymore. I'm still stuck between wanting to make this work and wanting to just move on. My mom keeps telling me that I should wait to move out, that things will get better. But I don't see any plan in action from her, and I can't keep living in limbo like this. The longer I stay, the more I feel like I'm losing myself in the process. I'm at a crossroads. I feel like the longer I stay in this relationship, the more I'll be sacrificing my peace of mind. But then, I'm not sure if I'm just overreacting or if it's really time to walk away. He has his good qualities, and I can't deny the bond we've built over the years. But at the same time, I can't ignore how his actions make me feel. I've tried to talk to him, but I feel like he's not really hearing me. I need more than just the same empty promises that things will get better. My mom's advice is to be patient, to wait until she has a more stable living situation, but I feel like I'm waiting for something that might never come. It's hard because I don't want to be the bad guy, but at the same time, I can't keep sacrificing my own happiness for the sake of a relationship that might not even be working anymore. I'm just stuck, and I don't know what the next step is. Does anyone else feel like they're constantly trying to hold things together when they're falling apart? I'm trying my best to do what's right for me, but the guilt and confusion keep weighing on me. How do you move forward when everything feels like a constant back and forth? How do you know when it's time to let go? Based on everything I've been through, here's the piece of advice I'd offer to anyone in a similar situation. Don't let the fear of being alone or the guilt of leaving cloud your judgment. It's really easy to get caught up in the idea that you need to stay in a relationship because you've invested so much time and energy into it, or because you don't want to hurt your partner's feelings. But at the end of the day, your well-being, your peace of mind, and your personal goals should come first. If you're feeling drained, unheard, or disrespected, it's okay to step away, even if that means facing uncomfortable emotions or feeling guilty. You deserve a relationship where you feel seen, heard, and supported, not one where you're constantly sacrificing your own needs for someone else's. Also, trust your instincts. If something feels off, listen to that gut feeling. It's not always easy to walk away from someone you care about, but sometimes staying in a toxic situation will only drag you down further. Take the time to prioritize yourself, your goals, and your emotional health. You can't pour from an empty cup, and no relationship is worth losing yourself for. Finally, communicate openly. It's important to have conversations about your boundaries, needs, and expectations early on in the relationship. If those things aren't being respected, or if your partner isn't willing to understand, then you have to decide whether staying is in your best interest. It's not selfish to want to be heard and respected, and it's not a sign of weakness to step away from a situation that doesn't serve you. You have the right to protect your peace. And remember, you're not a villain for wanting better for yourself. If your partner truly loves you, they'll respect your decision to prioritize your own happiness and growth. If they don't, it's an indication that maybe they're not the right one for you, and that's okay. There's no shame in wanting more for yourself and your future.